Hello everybody. It's great to see you again. My name is Wes Moore and I am your instructor for this macroeconomics course. Looking forward to our session today. This is session 6 on understanding unemployment. Let's take a look and see what we'll be talking about today. Understanding unemployment. There'll be three topics in our session today. The first is measuring unemployment. We want to talk about how we can actually measure the number of people that are out of work. Then we want to talk about sources of unemployment. What kinds of sources are there? What types of unemployment? What are the causes of unemployment? And how should we view those, and how concerned should we be about each of them? And then finally, we want to talk about problems with unemployment. And in this case, I want to focus in particular on unemployment pay and compensation and the problems that are associated with that. So let's get started then with measuring unemployment. How do we measure unemployment? Well, let's look at a couple of key terms first. The first thing we need to do is discuss the labor force. What is the labor force? Obviously, if we're going to talk about people who are not employed, who do not have jobs, we need to talk about the total group of people from which we can draw labor, from which we can get labor. That's called the labor force. In the United States, that's considered adults 16 and over who are working presently or are looking for work. Those 16 and over who are working now or are looking for work. And so the unemployed then would be those who, number one, want a job. In other words, they would take one if they could get it, and looked for a job in the last month. Those are the criteria that are used to determine if someone is unemployed. The unemployment rate then is the percentage of the labor force that is not employed, the unemployed. And that would be based on the definition of unemployed, that they, number one, they want a job, and number two, they've looked for one in the last month. So that is how we measure unemployment. A couple of other things to keep in mind about the labor force, the people that could be working. We don't count a few specific types of people. We don't count the military. When we're talking about the labor force, they're a completely different type of labor force, if you will. We don't talk about people who are confined in any way, whether it's a mental hospital, a prison, or a nursing home. Those people are not considered part of the workforce, part of the labor force, so we do not count them in terms of being unemployed. We also don't count people who have quit looking. These are called discouraged workers. They've looked for so long that they just stopped looking. But once you stop looking, by our definition, you drop out of the labor force, so you cannot be counted as unemployed. That is how we measure the unemployed. Now let's talk about the ranges of unemployment rates first, and then I want to show you a graphic from the Macroeconomics textbook about education and unemployment. Since 1948, unemployment rates have ranged from 2.5% to 11% until the COVID-19 shutdown of 2020, when it jumped to nearly 15%. So if you look at the statistics, you'll find between 2.5% and 11% most of the time. That 11% was in the 1980s, the recession in the 80s, and then after the Great Recession in 2008 and 9, we saw unemployment go high. But of course, in the shutdown of 2020 for COVID-19, we saw the unemployment rates jump tremendously to almost 15%. But what I want you to see here as a student taking a college course, I want you to see the graph from the textbook here, Macroeconomics by William Macroeconomics. And he shows here the unemployment rates of people based on their educational level. And this particular graph here is from 2015, people who were 25 years and older. And you'll notice here that the highest unemployment rates are those with the least education. Now, we're not knocking people who don't have an education. We're simply trying to show you that the more education you get, the more employed and employable you will be, even when things slow down. So here we have an 8% rate of unemployment for those who do not have a high school diploma. But if you get up to a bachelor's degree, you're less than 3%. And if you get a doctoral degree, you're under 2%, and a professional degree, which is doctors and lawyers and that kind of thing. So what I want you to see here is that by taking college courses, you are on the right track. You will be able to earn more money, and you will be able to earn it more often in terms of not being unemployed because you have so much education. So continue to move forward with your education because it's extremely important for staying employed and making money and being successful. So now let's talk about sources of unemployment. Why do people end up unemployed? Well, there are four classes or categories or causes, if you will, of unemployment that we want to talk about. The first is called frictional unemployment. Frictional unemployment is that unemployment that has to do with people who are changing jobs. That's a normal part of the economy. We generally don't worry about that one too much. No matter what we do, there will always be frictionally unemployed people. And then we have seasonal unemployment, and that makes sense, doesn't it? Those are people who can't work as much because of the weather, the seasons of the year. Think about paving roads in the northeast of the United States. In the winter months, it gets very difficult to work in that kind of job because there's snow and ice all over the roads. Whereas if you live where I live, down in South Carolina, in the Charleston area, they're paving roads all year around here because we have a very mild winter. But you're going to have people who are out of work because of the seasons, and there's really not a lot you can do about that. Then you have, thirdly, you have the structurally unemployed. These are workers who have the wrong skills for the types of jobs that are in an area. And what happens over time is the economy changes, technology changes, industries change, and you end up with people who have skills that are outdated. For example, I grew up in a town called Danville, Virginia, and Danville had a lot of textile mills, and in particular there was one textile manufacturer there named Dan River Mills, because Danville had the Dan River that ran right through it. Well, after NAFTA in the 1990s, which was a trade agreement with Canada and Mexico, most of the textile jobs, textile make clothing, bed sheets and comforters and blankets and towels and that kind of thing. Well, most of those jobs went south to Mexico because of the low cost of labor there. So you ended up with a lot of workers in Danville who had textile skills, textile experience, but once NAFTA hit, the whole geographic economy changed, and a lot of those folks were out of work because they didn't have the right skills. And the way that you fix that is by providing additional skills and training for people, and technical schools are a big part of that. And we have great educational programs in the United States, access to money, free tuition. You can get the training you need in America if you want to. And then finally we have cyclical unemployment. This has to do with the business cycles or the economy's cycles. The fact of the matter is, as we've already talked about, economies expand and they contract in cycles. They don't expand forever, they don't contract forever. Usually what you want is you want the expansions to be greater than the contractions, so over time your economy is getting larger. But when the economy contracts, when it shrinks, that means not as much is being produced and not as many workers are needed, no matter what their skill level or educational level. So this is really what we're concerned about. And we see governments during recessions spending a lot of money on what we call stimulus plans. But stimulus plans have been shown not to work, and there are a number of reasons to do that. So it's usually spending money for no reason. You have to just let the economy adjust, let the different factors work themselves out, and eventually the economy will turn around again. But those are the sources of unemployment. And because you have these sources, you can't actually ever get to 0% unemployment. You're always going to have some unemployment. And generally, economists will give you the 4 to 6% sort of is a healthy economy rate of unemployment. So if you're at 7, you're a little high. If you're at 3, you're a little low. But you can't ever really get to 0. So just keep that in mind when you see those statistics. And finally, let me talk to you a bit about some problems that have occurred because of unemployment, particularly unemployment compensation. As you probably know, people, when they're unemployed, the government has programs to give them some money. We call unemployment compensation or unemployment pay. So when you're out of work, You can get, it depends on the state, but you can get between $250 and $825 a week to be unemployed, to look for a job. And generally those benefits last for about 26 weeks. That's about 6 months, so half a year. But whenever there's a long recession, the government usually extends those even further. And I want to bring up a couple of problems that are related to the amount that we pay unemployment. But I don't want you to take from this that I don't think unemployment programs are good. They are good and they are helpful, and we need to have those programs for workers. But some of the things that we're doing today are causing more problems than actually keeping people out of work longer. And if you think about it, it's an opportunity cost problem. Let's do the math here. From $250 to $825 a week is $13,000 to $43,000 a year. Now granted, we said they normally last about 6 months, but if you laid it out for a year, that's an annual rate of pay of $13,000 to $43,000 a year. Now, in the United States of America, if you have an adjusted gross income of over $42,000 a year, you're in the top 50% of earners in the country. So at the very top end of even the most basic unemployment pay, we end up putting people into the top 50% of income. Now let's take the low end. Let's say that I'm working at a job and I'm making $8 an hour and I'm making roughly $16,000 a year. And if I get laid off, I can get $13,000 without doing a thing. The question is, why work then? Why should I look very hard for work if I can make almost as much money as I can make working through unemployment? And then we have this in 2020 we had the CARES Act, which was passed by Congress as a massive stimulus plan, which I've already told you that they generally don't work. But part of that plan was to add another $600 per week to the $250 to $825 that people already get. That puts your benefit level between $44,000 and $74,000 a year to be out of work. Now remember, I said $42,000 of adjusted gross income, that's after all of your deductions, is top 50% in America. So we are creating a problem here because the opportunity cost is so low for being out of work that there really is no reason to go back to work. Why should I hurry up and get back into the workforce and pay taxes and earn income if I can sit around and fill out a form every week and say I looked for a job and get $44,000 to $74,000 a year? What is the incentive then to find a job? William McEachern, in his Macroeconomics textbook, talked a little bit about this. He said, because these benefits reduce the opportunity cost of remaining unemployed, they may reduce the incentives for work. Evidence suggests that those collecting unemployment remain out of work longer than those without benefits. Many leave the labor force once their benefits run out. So what is he saying here? He's saying here is once you start paying people all this money not to work, if they find a legitimate reason not to work, like they got laid off, they're not going to be going very quickly back to work. And in fact, this last sentence here, he says many leave the labor force once their benefits run out. What he's saying is people get laid off, they decide not to go back to work at all, but they get on unemployment and collect it as long as they can. They say that they're looking for work when they're really not, and take the money, but are not intending on going back to work. He even points out a study that was conducted of unemployed people. And he said 82% of the unemployed in this survey said that they searched harder after their benefits were gone. That's the opportunity cost problem. 48% said they did not have to look as hard because they had unemployment. And 62% said that unemployment allowed them to take time for themselves. Now I ask you there, as you get out and you start working and you start paying taxes, how do you feel about people on unemployment saying they don't work, 82% saying they don't look that hard because they've got benefits, or 48% saying they don't have to look as hard, or 62% saying that they take time for themselves on your money? You see, we have to remember that all of these additional benefit programs above and beyond our normal budget as a nation, about 23% of the budget from 2019 for the federal government was borrowed. So anything that we add on top, the CARES Relief Act, any additional stimulus plans, paying off student loans, all these things that we're talking about doing comes from debt. The national debt is over $27 trillion. And I'm going to have more to say about this later on in the course. But you have to realize that every single thing that we spend, like the CARES Act, like this additional unemployment money, is all borrowed and will all have to be paid back by future generations. If something worse doesn't happen, like our default on our debts because the interest payments become too large, which is a real problem. And again, I'll mention that to you when we get to talking about the national debt. But the last thing I want to talk to you about that's a problem with unemployment benefits, it really has to do with our growing dependence upon the government to take care of us in the time of a crisis. We don't prepare well individually and as families to weather a storm. We spend everything that we take in, and then we turn to the government and we need the government's money, which is all borrowed, when something goes wrong. And I want to encourage you to take personal responsibility for yourself in a time of crisis. When you work, save a part of what you earn. When things are going well, put money away so that when it comes time for things to go south, and they always do, well, if you lose your job or if you need additional income or if you need to come up with something in a crisis, you have it. You don't have to turn to the government. You don't have to wait on the government to pass another stimulus plan. You need to take personal responsibility for yourself. If you have a decent job over any length of time, there is actually no reason for you to need unemployment if you're out of work for 3 or 4 months. You should have the savings set aside to be able to cover yourself in that kind of a situation. Again, I'm not saying that unemployment is bad. I'm simply saying that we have to stop turning to the government for everything that we need. We need to be responsible for ourselves. Save instead of spend, and then we won't have to worry so much about difficult times ahead. Well, that's the end of session 6. I hope that you have enjoyed that. I've enjoyed sharing it with you. I appreciate your time. I hope you have a great week. And until our next session, take care of yourself.